NFL star pretends to be asleep to test her shy assistant, then freezes when she sees what she's doing. The air inside Rachel Torres's penthouse was always still, so still it made even the softest sound feel like a disruption. Dust never lingered on its polished surfaces, and silence filled the long, echoing halls like a second coat of paint. That morning, the quiet was broken only by the faint sweep of a cloth gliding across the dining table's glass surface. Ethan Cole moved with practiced care, his motions gentle and precise. Sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows caught in his dark hair. The collar of his crisp white shirt was buttoned perfectly, his black slacks pressed without a single crease. He wore no cologne, no watch, nothing that called attention to himself. Even his presence felt like a whisper. He had been here almost a month. Hired on trial as a personal assistant, Ethan was as invisible as he was efficient. He worked before Rachel woke, organized schedules no one else could track, and kept to himself during any downtime. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't complain about long hours, and never once asked for extra compensation. But what struck everyone, especially those who'd worked with Rachel for years, was that he never accepted tips. Not from Marcus, the team's equipment manager known to slip a $20 bill into new hands. Not from Lisa, Rachel's publicist who admired Ethan's quiet diligence and once tucked cash into a stack of signed jerseys. Each time, Ethan's answer was the same, a soft, grateful smile and a quiet, "Thank you, but I can't take this." It might have seemed admirable to most, but to Rachel Torres, it was a red flag. Behind sleek glass doors in her home office, in a room lined with trophies and game photos, Rachel stood in front of a large screen split into 4 live feeds. Security cameras covering the penthouse's main rooms. Her eyes were fixed on one, Ethan in the kitchen, wiping the counter as sunlight pulled across the marble like honey. "He doesn't take tips," Rachel said flatly. Beside her, Vanessa, her longtime trainer and friend, looked up from her phone. "No, I saw that too. He's been solid, quiet, no complaints from anyone." Rachel didn't respond right away. She leaned closer to the screen, watching him adjust the fruit bowl, and paused to straighten a chair that was already perfectly aligned. His movements weren't rushed. He cared about things no one else noticed. "That's what bothers me," Rachel said. Vanessa raised a brow. "That he's good at his job." "That he's too good," Rachel replied. "Too perfect, too careful." She turned toward the window overlooking the city. "When I was a rookie," she said quietly, "I had an assistant who felt like family. He drove me to practice when I was injured, listened to me vent. Then one day he sold private photos to the tabloids and disappeared." Vanessa stayed silent. She'd heard fragments of this story before. Rachel continued, "My agent said it was a lesson. Don't trust people who seem too humble. The ones who smile the easiest lie the best." Vanessa glanced back at the screen. Ethan was now collecting his supplies, as precise as ever. "Maybe he's just decent," she offered. Rachel's jaw tightened. "Or maybe he's patient, playing the long game." She turned back to the screen, expression unreadable. "It's not enough that he won't take money. I want to see what he does when he thinks no one's watching. Not when it's easy to be good, but when it's not." Vanessa frowned. "You're going to test him?" Rachel nodded. "He's lasted a month," she said. "Let's see what happens when kindness isn't convenient." And for the first time since Ethan Cole arrived, Rachel Torres felt something foreign. Uncertainty. The living room of Rachel's penthouse was dressed in quiet elegance, high ceilings, floor-length curtains swaying gently with the afternoon breeze, and warm sunlight casting gold across the hardwood floors. Everything had been arranged carefully that day, more carefully than usual. On the large glass coffee table lay a designer wallet, a Rolex watch, and a neat stack of $100 bills, loosely held by a silver money clip. The setup looked casual, almost accidental, but it wasn't. Rachel Torres lay motionless on the leather sofa nearby. Her training gear showed the curves of her athletic frame, sleeves rolled just enough to show the championship tattoo on her wrist. Her head rested against the cushion, eyes closed, breath steady. Every detail was deliberate. Her posture, her breathing, the way her hand dangled over the edge, as though sleep had caught her mid-thought. But Rachel was wide awake, Behind the framed artwork on the far wall, a discreet security camera recorded everything. She had checked the angles, ensured nothing was obstructed. Today, she wasn't trusting her instincts. Today, she was gathering proof. She listened to the faint ticking of the wall clock. 2:47 p.m. Right on time, she heard the soft tread of shoes outside the room, a gentle knock on the open doorway. Silence, then footsteps. Ethan Cole. He entered with the same quiet presence that had begun to unsettle her. Gentle, unobtrusive, yet unmistakably aware. He wore his usual crisp white shirt and dark slacks. His hair was neatly styled, a few strands falling softly across his forehead. He moved with purpose, though today his steps seemed slower, more deliberate. Rachel resisted the urge to peek. She kept her breathing even, eyes relaxed behind lowered lids. His footsteps stopped. He had seen the items on the table. She waited. No sound at first, then the faintest intake of breath. His steps resumed, but not toward the table. He moved behind the sofa, adjusting the blinds, then crossed to the bookshelf and straightened a row of playbooks. He worked methodically, carefully, ignoring the obvious temptation inches from the woman who appeared asleep. Still, Rachel could feel it, his gaze. He had seen the money. He had looked. She counted 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then another pause. The room felt heavier with each breath she took. Would he reach for it? Would he pocket a bill and pretend nothing happened? Then came the sound of gentle movement. The cloth in his hand skimmed the table's edge. He moved closer, but not to steal. He was cleaning. She felt the faint shift of air as he passed her, careful not to disturb her sleep. He collected the empty protein shake bottle she had left earlier, wiped the tabletop, repositioned the coaster. Still, he hadn't touched the money. Rachel's heart beat louder than it should, louder than she wanted. Then came the moment she hadn't expected. Ethan paused. His hand hovered near the bills. Not touching, not trembling, just still. Then he reached for a hardcover book from the shelf behind the couch, a biography she'd once started and never finished. Without a word, he placed it gently on top of the money, as if shielding it from view. Not out of fear, not shame, but as if no one should see something so tempting left unattended. Rachel felt something flicker inside her. He turned and walked softly to the armchair nearby. From it, he picked up a folded throw blanket, light, soft, unused, and approached her. She wanted to stop him, say something, open her eyes, but she didn't. Not as he gently unfolded the blanket, not as he leaned over and tucked it lightly across her shoulders and torso. Not as his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, an action so tender it belonged in another life. And then, he whispered so low, it felt almost like a prayer. "Thank you for trusting me with this job. I won't let you down." Rachel's throat tightened. For the first time in years, the walls she had built, stone by stone, reason by reason, cracked, just slightly, but enough for something real to slip through. She lay still long after he had gone, eyes still closed, the weight of the blanket heavier than before, not in fabric, but in meaning. For a woman who had trusted nothing but her own strength, the honesty of a man who didn't know he was being watched was the most disarming thing of all. Rachel sat alone in her office, the room dim except for the soft blue glow of the security screen in front of her. The footage looped in silence, the same few minutes over and over. There he was, Ethan. She watched him enter the living room, pause. His gaze fell on the items she'd left out, the wallet, the watch, the neat stack of bills, and then on her asleep on the sofa. His eyes lingered, not with greed, not even curiosity, but something softer, thoughtful, cautious. Then the book, the blanket, the whisper. Rachel leaned forward, studying every detail. The way he smoothed the corner of the blanket, the way he looked at her, not like an NFL star, but simply a person. That quiet tenderness unsettled her more than anything he could have said. And still, she couldn't stop watching. His voice echoed faintly in her mind. "Thank you for trusting me with this job. I won't let you down." For the first time in years, Rachel Torres wasn't sure what to feel. She wanted to dismiss it. Maybe he saw the camera. Maybe it was all an act. But deep down, she knew better. There had been no performance in his eyes. It was real, and it left her shaken. The next day, passing by the kitchen, she slowed when she saw him alone, organizing her meal prep containers. He didn't notice her. His movements were steady, quiet. He paused only to fold a kitchen towel with precise care, placing it perfectly over the oven handle. Rachel stood in the shadows a moment longer than necessary, then moved on without a word. Later that week, the sky had fallen into a deep navy hue when Rachel spotted a Range Rover parked under the garage light. Inside, Marcus, their long-serving equipment manager, had dozed off, cap pulled low over his eyes. Then Ethan appeared. He moved quietly to the car, opened the door gently, and retrieved the team jacket from the back seat. With practiced care, he tucked it over Marcus's shoulders and adjusted it so it wouldn't fall. Then, silently, he closed the door and walked away. Rachel watched from the upstairs window, exhaling softly, the glass fogging under her breath. It wasn't just one gesture. This was who he was. In the days that followed, Rachel began to see more. A dusty trophy from her college days, long forgotten, was suddenly clean, its glass base gleaming. A squeaky door hinge stopped squeaking. A small note in delicate handwriting appeared by the fridge. Left extra greens for your post-game meal. Coach mentioned you needed more iron. It was signed only with a tiny hand-drawn star. No recognition, no announcement, just quiet acts of care. Then came the night she would remember for a long time. Rachel returned late from a team meeting, bag slung over one shoulder. As she crossed the hallway toward the balcony, she noticed someone sitting on the outdoor chair just beyond the glass door. Ethan. He was hunched slightly, arms wrapped around himself. His phone rested in his lap. Even from a distance, she saw his shoulders trembling. She opened the door slightly, enough to hear a muffled sob, then nothing. He wiped his face with his sleeve, inhaled slowly, and whispered something she couldn't make out. She didn't step outside, didn't interrupt. She just watched unseen as he steadied himself and quietly walked back inside. The next morning, Rachel woke before sunrise. She entered the kitchen before her morning run, brewed coffee, and reached into her desk drawer for a plain white envelope. She placed it beneath Ethan's usual notepad on the counter. Inside, a modest sum, enough for what he needed. On the envelope, a single line written in her careful slanted hand, "Do not refuse. It's your salary in advance." She didn't sign it. When Ethan found it later, his fingers trembled. He looked around the quiet kitchen. The coffee was still warm. He said nothing, and no one said anything to him. But behind a closed office door, Rachel sat with her untouched protein shake, staring out at the city skyline, her thoughts louder than any words could have been. It wasn't the money, it wasn't guilt, it was something else. Something like the beginning of trust, or maybe the beginning of something she had forgotten how to feel. It happened on a Thursday. The penthouse was unusually busy that day, filled with the clinking of glasses and low hum of conversation, as Rachel hosted a private event for a few longtime sponsors. The air was crisp, the staff moved like clockwork, and everything down to the placement of the hors d'oeuvres was exactly as it should be, until it wasn't. Midway through the event, a guest, a well-dressed woman in her early 50s with too much jewelry and a sharp tongue, stood from her chair and held up a small folded piece of dark cloth. "Excuse me," she called out loud enough for half the room to hear. "Someone dropped this, or should I say, tried to leave it behind?" Heads turned. Mrs. Patricia Beaumont held the handkerchief up like it was a piece of evidence. Her expression was one of theatrical disdain. "I found it under the chair in the lounge, right where Mr. Harrison had been sitting," she sniffed. "It smells of cedar and something else. Very deliberate." Rachel looked up from across the room, brows furrowed. Vanessa, her trainer, stepped forward. "I'll take care of it, ma'am," she said calmly, reaching for the cloth. But Mrs. Beaumont wasn't finished. "I've been to enough events to know how these things go. A handkerchief left behind, please. It's an old trick, one meant to draw attention, catch someone's eye." The implication hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Rachel's jaw tightened. Minutes later, Ethan was summoned to the back corridor near the office. He arrived quietly, hands folded in front of him, face pale but composed. Vanessa stood beside him, holding the handkerchief gently. "Is this yours, Ethan?" Vanessa asked softly. Ethan blinked, his gaze dropping to the cloth. A small embroidered initial sat neatly in one corner, the stitching slightly crooked. Yes, he said. It must have fallen from my pocket while I was setting up. He didn't do it on purpose, Vanessa added. He's had that since he arrived. I've seen it. But Rachel said nothing. She stood by the window, arms folded, her back half turned. The accusation, absurd as it was, struck something raw, something old. Finally she turned, her face unreadable. Ethan, I need to ask, were you trying to get someone's attention? No, he answered quickly. Then again, softer. No, ma'am. Then why didn't you say something when Mrs. Beaumont confronted you? He hesitated, hands clenching slightly. Because it wouldn't have mattered. Rachel's brows drew together. Excuse me? I've been accused before, he whispered. Then it came out slowly at first, then like a dam breaking. I used to work at a youth center. There was a kid, Tyler. One night he had an asthma attack. The ambulance was delayed, so I drove him to the hospital myself. Stayed all night. He paused, swallowing hard. A few days later, someone reported money missing from the donation box. They found it in a jacket I'd hung in the storage room. I didn't take it. I don't even know how it got there. His voice cracked. But they didn't ask. They just let me go. The room was silent. Ethan took a breath, his voice trembling. Since then, when people accuse me, I don't explain. I just leave. It's easier. People believe what they want. Rachel stood frozen, his words pounding through the armor she'd built. She looked again at the handkerchief. Not a ploy, not a trap, just a memory. Something stitched by a mother long gone, carried by a son who had already lost too much. Vanessa stepped back, leaving them alone. Ethan turned as if to leave. I'll collect my things, he whispered. No, Rachel said sharply. He paused. She stepped forward, voice low but steady. You're not going anywhere. He turned slightly, eyes wide. I was wrong, she said, the words unfamiliar. And I'm sorry. She picked up the handkerchief and pressed it gently into his hand. You don't have to explain anything else. Not to me. For the first time since arriving at the penthouse, Ethan let himself cry. Quietly, without shame, not from fear, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of finally being seen. The morning after the misunderstanding, the penthouse was quiet. The tension from the day before had faded, but something lingered, an unfinished thought, a word left unsaid. Rachel felt it in her chest like a quiet ache, subtle but persistent. She found Ethan alone in the study, organizing files with his usual quiet precision. For a moment, she simply watched how his hands moved, how he tilted his head slightly to read a handwritten note. Ethan, she said gently. He turned, startled, adjusting his collar. Would you come with me for a moment? He hesitated, then nodded. She led him past the living room and through the sliding doors to a private balcony at the far end of the penthouse. The city stretched out below them, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled in. It was quiet there, undisturbed, with potted plants climbing the railings and evening breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. This was my sanctuary, she said, voice softer than he'd ever heard. I used to sit here after every game, win or lose. She gestured to the small bench. Said the world felt simpler from up here. Ethan glanced around, unsure why she'd brought him. I haven't shared this space with anyone since my injury, she added, hands behind her back. She turned to face him. I owe you an apology for doubting you, for almost pushing you out. He looked down. I've always believed good people defend themselves. Speak up, prove something. She paused. But you taught me something else. That sometimes the kindest people say the least, not because they're hiding, but because they've been hurt enough to know silence is safer. Ethan's eyes met hers, surprised by the softness in her expression. This place used to feel like mine, she said, but today, it feels like yours too. For the first time, Rachel looked at him not as an assistant, not as staff, but as someone real, someone she could trust. From that day forward, quiet changes took place. Rachel began joining Ethan briefly for morning coffee in the kitchen, something she'd never done. When she poured herself a cup, she poured one for him too. At first, he refused politely, unsure how to respond. But the next morning, when she waited silently, placing the cup beside his, he finally sat down. She didn't talk much during those breaks, but her presence softened the room. Ethan noticed how the quiet line between employer and employee began to blur. One afternoon, Rachel called him into her trophy room. The space was vast, wall-to-wall shelves, cases, and rows of awards and memorabilia. Ethan stood near the doorway, unsure why he'd been called. "I'm having the collection reorganized," Rachel said, gesturing to the shelves. "Too many of these sit here gathering dust. Some should be displayed differently, others donated. I'd like you to decide." He blinked. "Me? I trust your judgment." Just a few words. But for someone who had always waited for permission, it felt like something far more. A week later, Rachel walked through the building's gym in the late afternoon. The golden light filtered through the high windows in soft ribbons. Near the weight racks, she heard laughter. Light. Breathless. She paused. Ethan was standing beside Marcus, the equipment manager, handing him a water bottle. He had a slight flush on his cheeks and held a clipboard. Marcus said something and Ethan laughed again, warm and full. Then he said something that stopped Rachel in her tracks. "If I can bring a little order to someone's day, even just by organizing schedules or preparing meals, then I think that's a life worth living." She didn't move. She stayed hidden behind the doorframe and let the words settle. It wasn't pity anymore, or admiration. Something had shifted. Rachel Torres, who had spent years hiding behind championship rings and stadium lights, felt something unfamiliar bloom quietly in her chest. Not guilt, not confusion, but respect, and maybe something dangerously close to love. The storm came suddenly that night, hard and relentless, drumming against the windows of Rachel's penthouse like 1,000 fingers tapping in urgency. Thunder rolled in from the distance, low and rumbling, as wind swept across the balcony, rattling the planters like paper. Inside the penthouse, the lights flickered once, twice, then went out. Rachel stood in the hallway, staring at the darkened chandelier. A few seconds later, the backup generator kicked in, but only partially. Security systems and hallway lights returned, yet most of the kitchen area remained dark. She grabbed a flashlight from the closet and started walking. As she turned the corner near the kitchen, she caught a flash of movement. Someone by the window. Then she saw him. Ethan. He was pressing a towel against a cracked window sill, rain blowing in, soaking the counter and him. His shirt clung to his shoulders, hair dampened from the wind. He was shivering. Rachel didn't think. She didn't speak. She walked straight to him, grabbed her team jacket from the back of a chair, and gently draped it over his shoulders. "Come on," she said quietly. She took his hand, not forcefully, just enough to guide him, down the hallway into the small emergency utility room near the service entrance, one of the few places where a soft amber light still glowed. It was warm there, cluttered, narrow, but dry. Safe. Ethan stood near the counter, arms crossed under her jacket, head low. Rachel poured water into 2 mismatched mugs, more for something to do than thirst. The rain slammed against the glass like it wanted in. She sat on the edge of the bench, watching him from the corner of her eye. They said nothing for a while, and for once, the silence felt right. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "Why did you stay?" Ethan looked up, surprised. She didn't explain, just looked at him, her gaze steady. "After everything, you could have left." He looked down at his hands. The sleeves of her jacket hung too long. "Because," he whispered, "no one has needed me like this place does." And he added, softer still, "I didn't want to leave while someone who's still hurting is pretending she isn't." Rachel's breath caught. He wasn't even looking at her, but his words saw straight through. She blinked slowly, turned away toward the rain outside, blurred, distorted. "I don't know how to be soft with people," she said. "I don't know how to be open." Ethan stepped closer. "You don't have to know," he said. "You just have to feel it." Rachel looked at him, then really looked, his face damp, cheeks flushed, but his eyes patient, understanding. And in that small utility room, under the hum of the emergency light, Rachel did something she'd never done without overthinking. She reached out. Not with fear, not with control, but with awe. Her hand hovered a moment before gently brushing a strand of hair from his face, settling lightly against his cheek. It wasn't a kiss, not a promise, just the first time Rachel Torres touched something she didn't want to lose. And for Ethan Cole, it was the first time someone touched him like he was real and safe. The rain continued to fall, but inside that small room, something far more fragile had just begun to grow. The night of the charity gala arrived with a quiet elegance. The hotel ballroom glowed beneath strings of warm lights, the tables decorated to perfection, and the centerpieces blooming with white orchids. Black cars pulled one after another into the valet area, their headlights slicing through the dusk. Guests stepped out in gowns and tailored suits, laughter mingling with the sound of champagne being poured, and the soft notes of a jazz quartet playing by the stage. But amid all the grandeur, Ethan stood calmly near the entrance, a small tablet in hand, greeting each guest with practiced warmth and a graceful nod. Rachel had asked him, trusted him with one of the most delicate roles of the evening, to oversee the flow of the event, the guest check-in, the seating arrangements, and the fine details that usually took a professional team to manage. Ethan had hesitated when she first asked. "Are you sure?" he had whispered. She'd only smiled. "There's no one else I'd rather have in charge." Now, as the ballroom filled with laughter and camera flashes, he moved through the crowd like he belonged, not as a guest, but as someone essential to the very soul of the event. From the far end of the ballroom, Rachel watched him. His dark suit was simple, tailored, but it brought out the strength in his frame. He was not the same man who had arrived at her doorstep weeks ago, afraid to speak, unsure of his place in the world. He had not changed, but something inside him had finally been allowed to shine. Later that evening, the music softened, and a member of the foundation board tapped a glass with a fork. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "Ms. Rachel Torres would like to say a few words." Rachel stepped onto the small stage in the center of the room, adjusting the microphone. Her dress was elegant, but her expression was softer than anyone had ever seen. "I've attended many events like this," she began, her voice steady, "and I've spoken about plays, championships, training regimens, and statistics. But tonight I'd like to speak about something else." The room grew quiet. "I want to tell you a story about someone most of you have probably walked past tonight without even noticing. A person who not long ago arrived here with very little. No connections, no reputation, no resume worth bragging about. Just quiet hands and eyes that had seen more than they deserved." She paused,